In the 13th century BC, the Egyptian pharaoh Seti I enslaves the Israeli people. To keep the Israelites weak, Seti I orders the male newborn's children to be drowned in the Nile. The newborn Moses is placed on a basket by his mother. The basket crosses the Nile and lands on the bank of the palace of the pharaoh. Moses grows up with Ramses II at court, and they are like brothers. In adulthood, they are two generals in the Egyptian army. In the battle against the Hittites, Moses saves Ramses II's life. After a conversation with an old man, Moses finds out about a slave revolt by the Israelites, and about his past. At the same time, Seti I dies, and Ramses II becomes the new pharaoh of Egypt. Ramses II learns of the conversation between Moses and the old slave, and confronts Moses. Moses tells him the truth. Ramses II's mother demands that Moses be executed. But Ramses II sends him into exile. After 9 years, Moses returns to Egypt, and which lets the 10 plagues begin. Plague 1. The water of the Nile turns to blood. Moses unleashes the first plague on the ancient Egyptians. The water of the Nile turned into blood, and became undrinkable. Fish, hippos and crocodiles of the Nile have died. A scientific explanation for this is that the red coloring of the water, and the death of the aquatic animals, is due to a species of algae. Under certain circumstances, this can produce such amounts of poison, that the water turns red, and the aquatic animals die. Plague 2. The invasion of the frogs. Millions of frogs covered ancient Egypt. The frogs were held in high esteem by the ancient Egyptians, and they were not killed. Researchers have found carefully prepared frogs in the tombs of some pharaohs. The Egyptian god, Fa, was depicted with a frog's head. Fat was the god of fertility. A scientific explanation for this is that by the algae that put a lot of poison into the Nile water, and thus the red coloring, and the animal dye started. Now the frogs have understood the situation, and masses of white ones fled the water to land. This is how the frog invasion came about. Plague 3. The mosquito invasion. Mosquito plague cover ancient Egypt en masse. No one is spared. All people are stung. Livestock like cows, and become pets such as dogs, and horses also haunted. A scientific explanation for this is that the frogs have left the water en masse, and died in the country, due to the strong sun. There were no more frogs in the water, keep mosquito proliferation under control. The mosquitoes could multiply uncontrollably en masse. This is how the huge number of mosquitoes came about. Plague 4. The invasion of flies. Large swarms of flies flew over and settled at huts of the simple Egyptians, temple complexes, and at the palace of the pharaoh. A scientific explanation for this is that the frogs have left the water en masse and died in the country due to the strong sun. The carcasses of the frogs were the perfect breeding ground the flies. This allowed the flies to multiply en masse. Plague 5. The livestock contract the Black Plague. The bubonic plague affects all horses, camels, cattle, sheep of the ancient Egyptians. This means that an important factor in feeding the population is lost. In addition, no goods could be transported, or the temple complexes to be built. The Egyptians regarded cattle as sacred. They even regarded cattle as the embodiment of deities. For example, the goddess Hathor resembled a cow. A scientific explanation for this is that through the bites of the mosquitoes, the animal plague, which was previously only found in a village, or was present in a few animals, now passed on en masse to many animals. The animal plague could not initially be passed on to humans. Plague 6. People get sick with the smallpox virus. The smallpox virus now affects all citizens of ancient Egypt. No one is spared, whether old, young, man, woman, or child. A scientific explanation for this is that through the bites of numerous mosquitoes, people have contracted the smallpox virus. Plague 7. The hail coming down from heaven. The hail killed people and cattle, and destroyed crops and trees. Houses and temples were severely damaged. A scientific explanation for this is that near today's Santorini in Greece, a volcano broke out at the same time as the plagues of Moses. Ash and sulfur made the weather system in Egypt cooler than usual for a few days. The formation of the hail was favored by strong winds and cold. Plague 8. The invasion of locusts. Locusts appear in large swarms. Everything that is plant-based, whether or not leaves, fruit, grains, are eaten up. Thus became all the crops and crops of ancient Egyptians eaten up. A scientific explanation for this is that locusts were not uncommon in ancient Egypt. What was left after the swarms of locusts was just wasteland. The death of the frogs allowed the locusts to reproduce unhindered. Plague 9. The eclipse of the sun. The eclipse lasted 3 days, and was considered by the ancient Egyptians as a punishment of the gods. A scientific explanation for this is that the eruption of the volcano in today's Greek Santorini emitted a lot of black volcanic ash. The ash clouds were carried by wind to ancient Egypt. This can lead to a massive darkening of the sky. Plague 10. Death of the firstborn. Firstborns were children in the family who were the oldest and were born first. The children had the highest rank among their siblings and were always the first to receive the food. A scientific explanation for this is that due to the previous catastrophe, mold grew formed in the wet grain. Due to the 3-day solar eclipse, the grain could not dry sufficiently. Because the firstborn of all the children in the family got food first, these also died.